If you've been scrolling through a dozen Minilathe listings, watching the same quiet, precise, perfect for hobbyists tagline over and over, and you're still not sure which one actually lives up to the hype, this review is meant to clear that up. I've spent a few evenings actually setting the Proxxon PD250 up on my bench, swapping out a few bits, and watching how it behaves when I try to turn a brass tube for a jewelry project and a piece of mild steel for a tiny gear. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the hesitation most people feel with a machine like this isn't about the price. Proxxon sits in a sweet spot for a benchtop lathe that promises precision, but about the risk of buying something that either underdelivers on the precision promise or turns out to be a noisy, vibrating beast that makes your garage feel like a construction site. The PD250 markets itself as quiet and powerful with a vibration-free operation, and after a couple of test runs I can say that the claim isn't just marketing fluff. The motor hums at a low pitch, and when I was turning a 6mm stainless steel rod, the whole bench barely registered any tremor. That level of stability is a real boon when you're trying to keep a thread clean or a surface finish smooth without constantly checking for wobble. Now, let's talk about the day-to-day usability. The lathe comes in a fairly compact box, and the setup is almost intuitive. You slide the headstock into place, tighten a few knobs, and you're ready to mount a workpiece. I appreciated the quick-release chuck. Swapping from a 6mm collet to a 12mm one took less than a minute, which matters when you're jumping between a brass jewelry component and a small aluminium propeller blade. The carriage moves smoothly along the bed, and the handwheel offers a nice amount of torque without feeling like you're fighting the mechanism. For anyone who's ever tried a cheap Chinese lathe that feels like you're turning a piece of wood, the difference in feel is immediate. The real test is how the machine handles the materials it claims to work with: steel, brass, and aluminium. On brass, the PD250 cut cleanly, leaving a surface that required only a light hands and no heavy filing. With aluminium, the lathe kept its speed steady, and because the motor doesn't scream, you can actually hear the chip formation, which helps you adjust feed rate on the fly. Steel was the toughest of the three. I managed to turn a 4mm mild steel rod into a small spacer, but the process was slower, and I had to back off the feed a bit to avoid tool chatter. The lathe isn't a powerhouse, so if you plan to do heavy cutting on hardened steel, you'll likely need a more robust machine. But for soft steel, hobby-grade material, it does the job without overheating the tool. One of the hidden trade-offs with a benchtop lathe is the limited swing over the bed. The PD250 gives you about a 125mm swing, which is fine for small projects like jewelry, model making, or prototyping a tiny shaft, but it quickly becomes a bottleneck if you start thinking about larger parts, say a 200mm diameter wheel for a small engine. The maximum workpiece length of 250mm is generous for the size of the machine, but you'll find yourself reaching for extensions if you want to turn longer rods. That's not a deal breaker, it's just a boundary you need to keep in mind when planning projects. Practical strengths. The quiet operation, as mentioned, makes it feasible to run in a home workshop without disturbing neighbors or a partner working from another room. The vibration-free design also means you can achieve finer tolerances without the need for a massive, dedicated foundation. The lathe's modularity shines when you start adding accessories: threading plates, a small steady rest, even a digital tachometer, because the base unit is sturdy enough to handle them without wobbling. The included toolbox feels like a thoughtful addition. It holds the basic tooling you need to start right away, which saves a beginner a trip to the hardware store. On the flip side, there are a few practical weaknesses to keep in mind. First, the motor's power rating, while adequate for light metal, can struggle when you push the limits of depth of cut, especially on tougher alloys. You'll notice the speed dropping slightly if you try to remove too much material in one pass. Second, the lathe doesn't come with a built-in coolant system, so if you're doing extended runs on brass or aluminium, you'll need to set up a drip or mist system yourself to keep the tool life reasonable. Finally, while the manual is clear, The learning curve for proper threading on a small lathe can be steep. The gears are precise, but you need a steady hand and a bit of practice to get